I could stand here and speak the entire time about the importance of developing place, whether we're talking about talent attraction, talent retention, economic development, home values within miles of trails and public parks. The data is overwhelming. But instead of hearing from me, let's hear from our panel in a brief video.
Within about a mile of the Joe Louis Greenway, there's about 167,000 residents that will now have access to this really beautiful, safe pedestrian walking, biking path.
Large trail segments around the country are proven to be an economic driver.
And so whether it's connecting our music venues, connecting our restaurants, we don't see these as park projects or trail projects. We actually see them as economic development projects.
We're focused on the total revitalization of the neighborhood and ensuring that everybody has an opportunity.
It takes a lot of local municipalities, a lot of nonprofit partners.
The City of Detroit is here to build it. We are here to activate it. The support of our funders allow us to have access to an endowment.
But what you're going to ultimately see is in the neighborhoods, you're going to see more jobs. You're going to see a better opportunity for that snowball.
The projects are great, but are we creating a culture in this community where people believe that they can strive for something better and then see those through to completion?
Historically, people put things in and they just expect you to accept it, and then it never gets used. This project was a little different. The city started engagement and outreach. They asked the community, what do you want?
You got to talk to them. You got to sit down and see what those needs and desires are. Utilizing that voice and ensuring that folks are at the table in that discussion.
You've got to work on the long-term play.
Really focus on an improvement and a quality of life.
Once folks believe that their issues are being addressed, then they can turn their hands outward to say, like, hey, we want everybody to be a part of our neighborhood, and this is the reason why.
All right, so we can just have lunch now. I think they said it all in a very brief period of time. But we'll go a little deeper, and just to give you a sense of how we'd like to run today's session, I'm going to ask each panelist an opening question, and then we want to get right to your questions and make this as interactive as possible. So when we think about placemaking, if you're in a major city like Detroit, many times there's lots of tools and resources. There's CDFIs, there's community development corporations, there's others working. When you get to the smaller communities and then the rural communities that surround them, placemaking can mean something very different. So we're pleased to have Randy Myers here. Randy, tell me what placemaking means and this kind of investment in Port Huron and the surrounding area.
Yeah, Dave, I was thinking about that, and I think if we were here 2 years ago, my answer would be different. Yesterday on a panel, I heard Leona use the word hope when it comes to placemaking projects. And I think in today's climate, I think that's probably the lens we use. We need to bring hope to communities. I think we need to use placemaking as a tool to show that multiple stakeholders and partners from every part of the community can work together and get something done. I think it builds bridges, right? And I think it's a tangible evidence that lets people see progress. A lot of times I think we would talk about economic impact, but I think when you're talking to neighborhoods and people, if we can attract talent, someone to move into a neighborhood in Port Huron, and they see investments happening led by philanthropy, led by the private sector, I think that reinforces with them. And honestly, I think in today's political climate, I think we can give our city managers and city councils a little bit of political cover. If we lead placemaking projects with philanthropy first, not paying for it all by first, but go out in the public and say, this is what we're hearing from the neighborhoods, right? This is what placemaking means. So it's a demonstration model. It's a leadership model. It does bring hope. It does bring faith. It brings belief that things can get better. And I think in these times, placemaking tends to be if I use the word safe loosely, it can be a very safe place to show progress, to show investment, to show leadership that's authentic, that responds. So to me, I love what you said yesterday. I think it builds hope in Port Huron.
Great. Well, speaking of neighborhoods, Jermaine, Strategic Neighborhood Fund, let's focus back on an urban setting where the reputation is there's two Detroits. There's what's happening in downtown and midtown and that corridor, and then there's the neighborhoods. The Strategic Neighborhood Fund has been working on corridor development, but also development without displacement. How are you doing that?
I think the priority for us as an organization has been on placekeeping, right? Placemaking is extremely important. to the process. But placekeeping for us, which means coming in, talking to residents who live there, talking to businesses that have weathered the storm about what their needs are, what their desires are, and what they want to see for the future of their community is something that's extremely important to the Strategic Neighborhood Fund. I think the other piece is that being grounded in the knowledge of the expertise that lives in the neighborhood helps my expertise as an urban planner, helps my expertise as someone who's been in the community and economic development field to be able to strategically align the tools that I have available with the needs that are in the community. So I think that for us, that's been the key component and the foundation for the work and the success that we've been able to have.
Right. Well, Liana, the JLG. So the Joe Louis Greenway, if you have not been to one of the trailheads or on one of the completed paths of the JLG, you got to go. It's a program and a project that's hard to define until you see it. So I'm going to ask you to try to do that. I mean, what has it meant, and what's happening in the neighborhoods where the pieces of trail have been completed?
Yeah, so, in that video, you saw Rushan Long. She is a longtime legacy resident of a neighborhood in Detroit called Midwest Tireman. She's one of my board members, one of our founding board members. And, the way I can answer that is kind of through a story about Rushan and those residents. So, they were a part of a community advisory council that was implemented by the city of Detroit in the initial engagement with the Joe Louis Greenway. And so just as Jermaine talked about, it starts with community. And so, Rushan will tell you that when this Joe Louis Greenway project started and the city started to come out and talk to residents, she was like, what is a greenway? We don't know what that is. And so the city said, well, let's go and look at greenways, and took residents on a trip, took them to Atlanta to show them the potential and the opportunity, but also talk about the challenges. Well, when Rushan came back, she assembled with some of her neighbors, her friends in the neighborhood, and they pooled their money together, about $9,000, and bought a parcel of undeveloped land in their neighborhood. And so when we talk about the impact of that, so now this group of residents who's now formed a nonprofit and is looking to develop that parcel of land into a public space with food access. But then when I tell more about the story, this is a neighborhood that's been disinvested for, 40 or 50 years. Rushan will talk about whether it was, storms that would come through and is there resources for FEMA? Well, no, you don't qualify for that. Well, are there resources for this program? No, your neighborhood doesn't meet the criteria for that. And for years, they felt that their neighborhood never met any criteria for anything. So then we come through, Ralph C. Wilson, some state dollars to build this park in their neighborhood, the first newly developed park ground up in their neighborhood. And so Rushan comes out and she says to me when she comes to our programming, many times like in awe, that this is really what's happening in their neighborhood. It's not theoretical. It's not something that's happening down the line. Yes, the Greenway was talked about for 20 plus years. But when it was time to hit the switch and to go, especially when you have big ideas and big vision, we all came together and we hit the button and said go. And so you see not only a park, but that park has spurred other things. And so in this neighborhood, so we talk about the park, but on the residential streets, where when I took over this job in 23 and did my first tour, the amount of vacant homes and blight that you saw, but if you drive it today on Alpine Street in Midwest Tireman, which is a block away from the Greenway, which is not even a block, it butts up to the Greenway, there are about 5 homes under construction. And these aren't, your speculator developers, the people who've come in from out of town. These are local, homegrown individuals who said, I'm going to take my money and rub my little 2 coins together and buy this property and redevelop it in my own neighborhood.
Because it's right there on the Greenway.
Because it's right there on the Greenway.
I was at the ribbon cutting for the park and that trailhead, and it was emotional. Mm-hmm. I mean, the level of awe, just respect, excitement of those neighbors and the stories they told, the ones that had been there for decades about how important this was, it was inspiring.
Yeah. We have residents still come up. I mean, we did some programming, and when we talk about placekeeping, right, and the engagement, it's so important for us to understand what kind of programming residents want to have. So we engage them. We say, what do you want to see? And so I have residents that just come out just to watch because they're still trying to emotionally process and tie together that this is where my mother lived or my grandparents lived, and I've lived in this neighborhood. I took a colleague from the University of Michigan on a tour of their humanities department, and she grew up in that neighborhood, and she started crying. She couldn't imagine that this was actually happening, and there was visible, tangible evidence of this project.
And there's this great tower with a slide there, and we couldn't get the grown-ups off so the kids could play.
Yes.
So, JJ, you are, in addition to building Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Park, which can be a major regional destination, you have recommendations to the foundation for literally hundreds of miles of trails. When we think about placemaking and development, trails are kind of a new thought. They weren't in the mix a decade or so ago for most people. Talk about why trails are important in the region.
I feel very fortunate to get to see all of these projects and these organizations doing great work in their community. And to answer that question, I just want to take a moment. We have an incredible cohort of leaders that are out there listening to community and filling those needs. We heard about it with Ryan and with Amy and with Megan yesterday in the same room with these leaders that are up here. And I just want to have a big round of applause for what they're driving in their community. It's just, they're listening, and then they're partnering, and they're getting it done. So just thank you all for what you're doing. For us, we see all these projects across the region. It starts at the riverfront. That's kind of the crown jewel, and the park that'll open in October. And then you have the Joe Louis Greenway, which connects those neighborhoods to the riverfront. But beyond that, we see it across the region. We have the Downriver Link Greenway that's connecting 18 downriver communities that connect to the Joe Louis Greenway. The Huron-Waterloo Pathway Initiative that's connecting Ann Arbor, Chelsea, Dexter, through the Iron Belt Trail and ultimately down to Detroit. You have the Great Lake to Lake Trail that goes across Wixom, Walled Lake, Commerce Township, and soon through Pontiac. And then it gets up to the Bridge to Bay up in St. Clair County. So all of these have a couple of themes. Right, they connect communities, literally and figuratively, right? They connect us. Most importantly, these public spaces connect people. I mentioned earlier today to someone, when I have my kids out in one of these public spaces, and you may have your kids out in these public spaces, we connect at a very basic level. It doesn't matter for red or blue, doesn't matter our income levels or what neighborhood we're from, but we connect at a very basic level because of that hope and that joy we see in our kids just playing together. Then you get to the other pieces that Leona mentioned yesterday. There's transportation alternatives that come out of those, right? There's recreational opportunities, and then you get to economic development. These spaces, we're seeing businesses thrive around these spaces because of the recreational economy we have in Michigan. And when you put all that together and what the North Star for the foundation is, quality of life in Southeast Michigan, all those things make our region stronger. And what I love is kind of the theme of the conference. You know, when you have better quality of life in our region, then you have businesses in the region and the state can attract talent, and they can retain their talent because people want to live here, they want to work here, and they want to play here.
Right. So we're going to have folks in the audience with microphones. If you have a question, raise your hand, and they'll find you. Let me ask one more before we turn to the audience questions. To me, this is the elephant in the room. The public funding scheme is changing. And so many of these projects are heavily publicly funded. What's your biggest fear in this environment to keeping this kind of work going?
The unknown, right? I think, so for the Joe Louis Greenway team, we've done some risk assessments of some federal funds. And I think if we had a rubric that we could use to evaluate and to understand, that would really help us to plan. And I think the biggest challenge that we have is the unknown. How do we really understand the risk of one, funding tool over the other one? And so that's really big. We want to do big things for community, and we need our elected officials to really dial in on, I think, a shared value that public space is important. It's a critical asset for our communities, for our residents, for our overall health and wellness, and when we talk about the quality of life. And it's really not something that we should be negotiating at this very critical point where things are very all over the place, right? One place that we continue to see people be able to go to is their park, their local park, their trail, to take a walk or to walk their dogs or to do things like that, or to recreate or to participate in an activity. I mean, think if you took away all of the soccer fields or the sports fields or the lacrosse fields or the basketball courts that were publicly funded, especially in a time where a lot of these programs are not being funded in schools. So really the unknown for us is a challenge.
I think for me, it is the fear of losing the collaboration that we've built up over the last few years. When there's a scarcity of resources, folks look inward, right? We're like, what do we need to protect for ourselves? What do we need to protect for our community? And I think over the last couple of years, we've seen that success in the state of Michigan, success in the city of Detroit requires continued collaboration. So when we talk about the Strategic Neighborhood Fund, it is a public-private partnership, and that's real. I have some good friends. I worked at the city, and some good friends who are in the room now who, if not for that partnership from the public side, of them committing to the planning for these neighborhoods, committing to saying, hey, we have resources that we can use to leverage and expand the dollars that have come from foundations who have supported our effort within these neighborhoods. We need that collaboration to continue. And that's the thing that I fear the most, is that we'll start looking inward and saying we need to save ourselves, as opposed to saying we need to collectively save each other, because that means that we're enhancing the city, we're enhancing the neighborhoods, and overall we're enhancing the state of Michigan.
I would echo that. The partnerships that we see between the leaders that I mentioned earlier and the leaders in state government at the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Transportation, yes. MEDC, all the acronyms at the state level. If that goes away, something's going to be lost. We're not going to be able to build these things. But then it goes to this next component. We've, coming out of COVID, everybody saw how valuable these spaces were, and we've seen this incredible influx of funds to make these spaces great. Well, I think the natural question is how do we make sure we take care of these spaces so it's not just when you cut a ribbon on them, but they're there for my kids and my kids' kids.
Absolutely.
And I think there's a tendency, to your point, to kind of go back into your corner and compete for those resources. I think more than ever we need to figure out how to, one, invest in the leaders that are leading these spaces, but then also make sure that the funding is there to take care of them for the future.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I would dive down a little bit more maybe to the tactical level. So in small town Michigan, if we're doing a placemaking project, if we're doing bridge debate trails, that's 8 different communities I have to worry about. I don't have one city to worry about, and I think that's true for a large part of Michigan. So in philanthropy, and I think with our foundation, we're 80 years old, when we have heard from the residents, when we've heard from our constituents, we've heard from our donors and our partners, and if we say we're going to do something, we are not changing our word. We're not going back on it. When we make a promise, it becomes a multi-year commitment to do any kind of placemaking project that matters. So we operate in multiple years. Well, then when you have 8 different cities up and down the coast of the St. Clair River, subject to every single election and them changing their mind, that puts us in a very awkward spot. We have to learn new muscle memory of how we work with elected bodies, right? Preparing for someone to come in and say, I disagree with everything about your foundation, your project, and I don't like placemaking. Mm-hmm. Well, if we haven't rallied the community and the neighborhood and the voices to counter that, the entire project is in jeopardy. That's right. We began the Bridge Debate Trail, so our beginning was 2017, Dave. We're probably still 5 or 6 years away, right? When we make a promise, we're going to do it, but now we have to deal with political realities across multiple communities, multiple elected people. And it's a continuing education. So now, in a smaller, modest organization like ours, how do we find the time and resources to manage political relationships all the time, right? So from a very tactical level, I think it scares us a little bit to say yes to the next thing. There's no big placemaking project that happens in 3 months or 4 months. That does not happen, let alone a fiscal or calendar year. So now I think foundations like mine around the state are going to have to say, we now have to have a new skill set, a new staff capacity to manage political relationships, because we can't go back on these promises. The neighborhood, building those houses along your project, imagine if we said, no, you know what, the election changed and now we're not going to do that. That's just not acceptable. It's scary at a tactical, strategic project management level.
But isn't that the importance of when we all talk about our projects, why when we say community, it's not just something to say, right?
Yeah.
You know, I get this question all the time, right? I'm in Detroit, you know, one of my major stakeholders is the city of Detroit, so we know there's a mayoral election. And people ask me all the time, like, what are you know, there's gonna be a different mayor. This is the people's project. And so as long as I am, you know, those are my constituents, they will advocate for this project. When we talk about community engagement, it is so that they can say, next mayor, this is an important project, this is our value. We are expecting you to fulfill on the promise that has already been made. And so when we talk about that change, you know, the continuity for me is ensuring that we are working to serve those residents, those people, those visitors who say, when I come to Detroit, I enjoy that clean and well-maintained greenway that I know that you're going to finish and you're not gonna walk away, because we've already invested taxpayer dollars. So we don't get to just invest those taxpayer dollars and those private dollars and those donations from residents that have made the riverfront, right, beautiful, that has made the Belle Isle beautiful, right? We want to make sure that you fulfill those promises, because not only did you put our taxpayer dollars, I then gave more of my money out of my pocket to donate. And so when we talk about community input and the value of residents, that's why. Because I get to say, well, you got to talk to these residents because this is their greenway.
So I'm turning to you for questions. Raise your hand if you have one, and we'll find you here with the microphone. While the microphone comes, JJ, talk a bit about the community engagement process that was put in place for Ralph Wilson Park.
Absolutely. Just to echo what Leona's saying is, you know, that community vision, when it's done right, is really hard to argue with. Those authentic voices that share what they want, and you can't do everything right, but you have that continued process and that communication where you're talking about the whatever restrictions you may have, financial or technical or whatnot, but you're listening. And so for the park in Detroit, and also the one that's being built in Buffalo, they set up the community action teams, where they not only just asked community to come to a room, but they actually then asked those folks to go out to their community and then bring those ideas and that vision back. And it didn't stop after 6 months or 9 months. It's still going on. I think the last community meeting that was held for Ralph Wilson Park, which will open in October, was a month or two ago. So it's that continuous process, because a park is never done. A public space is never done. A park is actually probably at its least attractive the day you cut the ribbon. It will continue to grow and continue to evolve. So that community engagement becomes even more valuable in the future.
And even with the riverfront in Ralph Wilson Park, one of the most beautiful things about that was the youth engagement.
Yeah.
And so when you go out talking about there's a bear, right, slide, or, I mean, the kids drew that. And so being able to take young children and incorporate them into that engagement process, so that if we're talking about talent attraction or talent retention, we're building a city for them, right? Because, you know, we're getting older,
Yeah.
right? Getting closer to the grave.
And I can attest to that bear slide. I slid down it last week. And for the big kids, it's great too.
Got to do it at least once. At least once.
So kudos to Ryan and Cassie, the Riverfront team, for that continued engagement. It's been terrific. We had a question over here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this panel. I actually found out the hard way that I think the slide at the West Warren Gateway
Don't do it.
Yeah, I think I'm too heavy for it, because I really flew off of it and made a fool of myself, but it was fun. But yeah, so I love all these projects. I'm excited about all of them. But they're big, right? They're grand, they're multi-year, they're really exciting. But I've worked a lot with resident leaders on the east side who can do more with a $3,000 mini grant than like a lot of our larger organizations can do with like these huge investments. And so I think both are important. And so I've been thinking a lot about like, how can we invest in these resident leaders who are already investing in public space, and like kind of creating community gardens, building gazebos that people are using for prom send-offs, like all of these other things. So do you have any like examples of like kind of mini granting or like sub granting
Great
resident leaders?
Great question. Jermaine, I think this is at the core of SNF.
Yeah, absolutely. So we at Invest Detroit in the Strategic Neighborhood Fund, we started a program called Spark Grants, right? And a part of it was to address that reason, is that usually with these big initiatives, we come in and we're looking for transformational. We're looking for projects that we can all get in front of, cut the ribbon, and then come back, 12 to 18, 24 months and have a big celebration, and then folks tend to forget about that, right? I think when we come into the work of the neighborhoods, you have to start at that ground level and having conversation, because one, what I think is extremely important, especially in this day and age, is for folks to know that the development is for them, right? A lot of times when we talk about the city of Detroit and we're talking about development in the community, folks are thinking it's like, oh, we're trying to attract people from outside, but they haven't started with me. Oh, sorry, with me. And my need is, we want to see this lot beautified right here, or we want to create an urban garden, or we want to be able to have a pop-up of multiple businesses that we know have been operating in their homes for, a couple years, but they now want to try to come out and celebrate those businesses because they're core to that community. So having a fund and having resources that address those types of needs, we work with a great organization, Live 6, we work with East Warren Development Corporation, and those organizations focus on farmers markets. They focus on addressing the needs that exist in the community today. And while at the same time, we can have that grand vision, we can have that grand strategy, and we're moving along, but we're addressing those needs first in community. And so I think if you do both of those things at the same time and you're communicating with the community on a regular basis, then it becomes, this is our project. They're supporting our desires, our needs, and what we want to see for the future of our neighborhoods. And that's the strongest, kind of point that I want to leave you all with today, is that we're all operating in different neighborhoods, right? Some of us as professionals, we work in neighborhoods that we don't live in, right? So for me, the expert is that person that's on the ground, someone like you who's working in community. If I can have that conversation with you and you say, here's the needs, or this group says, here are the needs, it's our duty, being in a position, whether it's on the public or private side, if you're investing in a neighborhood, to listen. And that's what we try to do.
Randy, you're balancing this constantly. With your grants.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, don't let placemaking scare you. So again, I think our foundation represents small town Michigan, right? Our first placemaking project came out of a visiting session in 2008, 2009. Who remembers how wonderful those years were, right? They were absolutely horrible. And we had just launched the visioning process, and two of the ideas, Dave, that people wanted to see in downtown Port Huron, that they wanted to see someone invest, was an outdoor fireplace and an outdoor giant chess and checker set. That's all. Happened to be coming out of a wedding reception in downtown Holland. They had a fireplace outside. I snapped a picture. I went home. I met with a donor I could count on. And I said, Donna, I need $15,000 to build a fireplace and $15,000 to build a chess set, because people are desperate to see some tangible thing happen. $15,000, that's all. She wrote me a check that day. Downtown Port Huron today, still many years later, giant chess and checker set, multiple fireplaces. You can do small things, but it gets back to showing hope. Let someone demonstrate we believe in our town. Houghton has a beautiful pocket park. K-Pac, Michigan, if you've ever heard of K-Pac, Michigan, we funded $40,000, built a pocket park in K-Pac. To downtown K-Pac, that is transformational, because it was their idea. They originated it. We just came alongside them and said, we believe in K-Pac's vision. Let us help make it reality.
Great. Another question here.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank the panel also, but I also want to thank the Wilson Foundation, because one of the things that the Wilson Foundation has done, number one, we have the #1 river walk in the country, but number two, when you saw challenges, you rallied the nonprofit community and the corporate community, which we all know. We don't need to talk about what happened. Is Wilson Foundation, will they take the lead as JLJ, Joe Louis Greenway, and Invest Detroit are concerned about loss of federal dollars, to do that same rally cry amongst the nonprofit and corporate community to ebb that, to fill that gap that we see, because we see the benefit. Look at what you've done in 10 years. So that, I guess my question is, I hate to put you on the spot, we still need you.
Well, thank you for the question. And I think that first and foremost, there's been hiccups, whether you talk about COVID or you talk about what happened on the riverfront. The thing that I'm most proud of, and to be part of, is whenever we've had one of those hiccups, our trustees have stepped up. And through COVID, I can remember a conversation, what do we do? How do we react? And the answer was, we double down. And I think that's an important message. The challenge the reality is we're spend down and we've only got 9 years, 7 months and a few days left. I think we continue to look at those gaps, how we fill them, how we support them, but we're also thinking about how we support these public spaces. As we make these grants to build the spaces, the trustees are dedicated to putting at least 20% away in endowments to make sure we can take care of. That won't solve all the problem, but at least there's a baseline to take care of these spaces. I think we're now north of $50 million in endowments just in Southeast Michigan for these spaces, like the Joe Louis Greenway, like the riverfront, and to keep these trails across the region set. So we can't solve everything, but I think that the spirit is there to do as much as we can in the time we have.
Right. If I can jump in on that one too, JJ, we're only as good as the grantees on the street and the people in the community that are rallying. We don't do anything. We have the privilege of being able to write a few checks. When the riverfront issue happened, there wasn't a day missed of activity on that riverfront. That staff rallied every day. And there wasn't an event missed. If you weren't reading the newspaper, you had no idea there was a problem because they didn't miss a beat. And so as we entered this very tumultuous moment where funds across the full sector are somewhat in jeopardy, we can only be as good as the grantees and the community members trying to rally. And we have limited resources. So you've hit one of my fears that what is philanthropy's play at this moment when the gap is so wide? Because there's just not enough money to fill the gaps that are coming. And how will the communities rally, and how do we help empower that? And we're working through it. And I know, Jermaine, you're seeing this in your work too, in many ways.
Yeah.
There's going to be impact. How are you ready to handle it?
I think it goes back to this piece around the Joe Louis Greenway as well, which is being able to have your work grounded in community gives us the opportunity to also go back when the news is bad, right? A lot of times we think of community because we want to hear the positive input. But, working in the city of Detroit, if you're doing something wrong, somebody's going to tell you, right?
That's right.
And in the community, you want that. If you're serious about this work, you want to have a relationship that goes both ways, right? And so when the news is bad and folks are saying like, we need this address, why is this happening? We've been able to build up, trust through working with community organizations. We have, community leaders that we're in contact with on a regular basis because I'm not on the ground 24/7, right? And so being able to have that trust and being able to go back and talk to the folks who are directly impacted by our work and get the bad news along with the good news is extremely important to this work. And I think that the leaders who have seen a lot of success, and like Liana here, around the work that we've been doing, is that we're willing to have that exchange, right? You're willing to have that exchange. And because of that, whether the news is good, whether the news is bad, you have to be consistent in how you're showing leadership to the community and how you're receiving their input. They might curse at you, they might raise their voice, all of those things, but I look at that as the passion and the love of representing their community and protecting their assets, right? Protecting what they have weathered the storm with, especially in the city of Detroit, a lot of these neighborhoods that we went into had not seen investment for 15 or more years. Imagine a year into that, the first year somebody says like, hey, we're going to come in and we're going to revitalize your neighborhood. Do you know how many times folks have heard that message from folks who never followed through? So that's why it's important to have those micro grants. That's why it's important to think of not only the large transformational projects, but those projects that are in between that make a real difference in the lives of people every day. And so that's how we're trying to address it. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. But that's why you create that feedback loop so you can know where you need to step your game up or where you might be leaning in a little too far.
I just need to jump in and say something to the question of, how's philanthropy leaning in to support if there's going to be, the loss of federal fundings. I'm the one with the heels on, and I need us to buck up and fight back.
Hey, let's do
right?
it.
Like
Absolutely.
we cannot just lay down because of the current political climate. right? We cannot just say, well, there are going to be dollars that are just going to be drawn back here and then we just have, no, we need to continuously, as a collective, as a group, say we are not going to accept this. Like we need elected officials, we need, foundation leaders, philanthropy leaders, leaders of corporations to continuously say that this is not our value. This is not how we want our country to be. We do not want to sell off our public spaces. We do not want to negotiate on these things. And so my different take is like, take the gloves off, like pull your earrings off, get the Vaseline out on your face and get ready. Because we all need to continuously know that we can't continue to let them push us further and further towards the edge of the cliff, because at a moment we're going to be in the water drowning.
Right. Those of you wishing to support Leona's campain, send your contribution.
Line up in the back.
That's right.
Sign me up.
Sign me up.
Go ahead. Did you have?
No, I said sign me up.
Oh, yeah. He's going to write the first check. Was there another question? Great.
Yes, hi. First of all, thank you for all that you guys do. I will say that I'm in the Port Huron market, and the idea of the sustainability of these projects I think is incredibly important. One of the things, though, that I also think is difficult to do, and I would encourage you to do, I have a group of radio stations that work with Randy quite often on some of the things that go on in our area, but I'm sitting here next to our Convention and Visitors Bureau head. I really do think that communicating clearly with your media partners, expecting them, to be able to share that messaging is really, really important. And I just encourage you to do that, because I think in our world, it's like, well, what can we do to remove roadblocks? How do we make it possible for people that don't live in the neighborhood that you might be affecting know how important it is that these projects are going on, and how do we share them in meaningful ways through pictures, videos, all these things that can really be assets to you all. And I think it helps to fight that fight as well. So I guess it's not much of a question, but just encouraging you to have that relationship. We all want to have that. So
Thank you, Scott. Let's explore that one a little bit.
Yeah.
Are we gathering enough data on the impact of this work to tell a compelling story? And are we telling the stories that also are so personal about people that people are moved emotionally by it? Are we doing enough to start this kind of storytelling campaign that's going to be necessary?
I would say we could do more, but we are where we are, right? The recognition of there is a need and a desire for constant communication with residents in a way that might not have existed in the past, right? So for us, when it comes to telling the stories of the neighborhood, we ground it with the residents, we ground it with the small businesses, and we interview them. We talk to them about the impact. We talk to them about how well this is going or how well it's not going, to get that type of feedback loop. And I think somebody who's done that really well, and I'm going to give you credit, Leona, is the Joe Louis Greenway Partnership. They've been outstanding with their social media approach. And so I've kind of copied a little bit of that just to say, it's like, because the way that you can tell stories is in that visual way, right? There are folks who, we all learn differently. And so being able to have the audio, being able to have the visual, being able to have a combination of those things and make sure that it's centered around, not me, because you probably get tired of seeing my face, but around folks who are in the neighborhood. Because what ends up happening is folks may see me downtown and, they might see me in the neighborhood at an event or these types of things. But that resident, that small business, they're going to see them almost every day. And so why not have those folks who are closest to this work, being impacted by this work, being the folks who are communicating? And we have to be intentional about telling those stories. And so we've attempted to do that.
And are you gathering data, Jermaine?
Yes, and we are gathering data as well. And I think that's the other critical part of this discussion, is being able to have data partners who understand the neighborhood level type of work. It's not all communities are created the same, not all have the same issues. And what we've learned is when you talk about redevelopment, not all communities are starting in the same space. We had communities that, may have not seen investment for 15 years. And we had some communities that were on the, what we call kind of like on the bubble, so to speak, where they've seen investment, but now they're seeing a downturn because residents may be leaving for one reason or another, or some businesses closed, or you have a plant closed, and those types of things. And so to be able to have the data in real time that tracks, what is the impact that we're having on jobs? What is the impact that we're having on the housing piece? What is the impact that we're having with the increase in small businesses and jobs that are being operated within our footprint is extremely important, because if the narrative doesn't match the data, then what are we doing, right? And so we need to make sure that we're being honest, we're being upfront and transparent as much as we can with the work that we're doing.
I would add to it, maybe a little bit of inside baseball with the foundation right now, is that we're looking at our evaluation for this work. Yeah. And it's really easy to measure number of miles, number of dollars, number of users. But what we wrestle with, and I think it's right in line with what you're talking about, is how do we come together on what those data points are, and how do we empower our grantees to actually gather that data, and we're all telling a similar story, because if we do it based on our investments and then we go away, what good is that? But how do we work with our partners to gather that data and tell those stories to make the nonprofits and the leaders that are doing this work on the ground even stronger as we exit the market?
If I could, be the person to say that as a nonprofit leader, data gathering is a position, right? And so, that's a staff position. Mm-hmm. And it is so vital and critical to all of the work that we do. If you apply for federal grants, you've got to have tons of data. They want lots of reporting. For annual reports, marketing, the social media, that's a person, that's not me. That's somebody who is paid to do that. And I think the important thing for nonprofit leaders is, when we talk about capacity building funding, it has to be like capacity across the board, right? The capacity to tell the story. The $20,000 that it might cost to hire the videographer to record that footage and get those people out there and to do all of that stuff and to edit it and to post that 2-minute video, right? I mean, those are actual tangible dollars that and many of us nonprofits are really so focused, because oftentimes what we see from funders and philanthropy is the program. Yeah. So how does the program, but we got to market that program. We have to advertise that program. We got to do flyers. We got to do door to door. We got to, do all of the things. And so it's so critically important for, I would love to see like a nonprofit philanthropy like training program, right? Where philanthropy gets to get in there. And to understand the commitment of teams. So I tell my person hey, you got to run the program, but I need you to walk around with a clicker and capture the data of everybody. And then I need you to go back and then ask everybody all of this information. And then we got to send out a post-event survey. So all of that is a position. And we need, I think Wilson is in a great position to do that, is to say, funders, you got to really understand what it takes for these nonprofits that are 3 people to capture, to collect, to analyze, and to then narrate all of the work that they're doing. Because for us, we talked about yesterday, 15 million visitors between all 3, the Joe Louis Greenway was 100,000 people of that, so, right? But we're in there, and we want to be able to capture and collect data, because that's the impact. But that is an actual person, position, paid staff, that's benefits, that's all of those things. And so we need to make sure that we're talking about how do we tool up nonprofits to do it effectively, so that the narrative that we're sharing is absolutely value added.
See, I'm so glad there's another funder up here. I'm really glad there's another funder up here. So why aren't you funding this stuff, Randy?
Good transition.
So another question back here.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Elena Jackson, Managing Director of Global Detroit. I want to put out there initially, I'm fully biased. I'm a big fan of Jermaine Ruffin, been following his work for a long time. And,
as am I.
Tell you the truth about it. And because of that, I'm really familiar with his work since the city, and less familiar with the breadth and depth of everybody else's work. And so some of this you may already be doing, and if so, I'm happy to hear what steps you've taken. If not, I'd like to plant the seed on 2 things. So at Global Detroit, we believe that immigrant inclusion is an economic development strategy and a pathway towards prosperity for all Michiganders. We do neighborhood level work, and some of the neighborhoods and what you all are working. And there are two things that we've come to understand. And as a Black woman, I understand this first one intimately, experiencing it every day of my life, which is invisibility. I am often hiding in plain sight. I can be in front of a person and they not see me. And what I have learned is that in our immigrant communities, that is often the case for them. They're in neighborhoods. In some cases, there's rapid immigration into Detroit neighborhoods. Yeah. And in some cases, these are communities that have been there for generations. And we don't know, we don't see them, we don't hear them. They're in their own little enclave of a cultural and language bubble. And so I'm curious about what efforts have been taken to make visible those who have been historically invisible in community engagement work, because these are our neighbors, our family, and our friends as well. And they're gonna come to the picnic with tacos, churros, kebabs, and everything else, and I want all of it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about how in this work the engagement is leaning into invisibility and voice of communities that sometimes we forget about.
Go ahead.
Second part of the question is, what we've learned at Global Detroit is social cohesion is a pathway towards community resiliency. And there are often anti-Black and anti-immigrant biases that come to play when you bring people in a room together to come to do this work. We've learned through contact theory of some ways to address these biases and bring people together to support this work in ways that are sustainable. And I'm curious if you've all experienced any tensions that you've had to navigate around social cohesion and what you found to be successful, and want to offer myself up and Global Detroit up as a partner in that work if you are encountering it and haven't yet figured out a pathway through it.
Great, thank you for those questions. So let's start with the second question first. Are you seeing tension with folks who are not trying to be inclusive, who are indeed trying to be exclusive, and how some of the planning is coming together?
I can take that. I would say, I don't think that we're seeing it from people who are intentionally trying to be. What I would say is that when you think about how urban planning has really segregated neighborhoods in specifically the city of Detroit, and then talking even more specifically about the Joe Louis Greenway, again, there was a train. That train separated neighborhoods, and then over time, that separation became cultural, language differences. And even in the Black community, the Black people who lived on this side didn't interact with the Black people who lived on the other side. So I think that there was a little bit of a thought that once we built the Greenway, removed the rail line, cleaned up the trail, all of the debris is there, we're going to build a greenway in a park, and it's all going to be kumbaya, everybody's going to come together, it's going to be beautiful. I'm going to tell you that's not the case. As we continue to do community engagement within, and I'm just going to talk about this particular set of communities, what we did find is that there was a great deal of tension between legacy Black residents and legacy Hispanic and Latinx residents in the community because they just did not interact with each other. There was just, I'm in my neighborhood and I live here, and I'm in my neighborhood and I live there, but now everybody's coming together in a park. And we've begun to see it even in terms of talking about, what does the, future economic development strategy look like? Do we want more affordable housing? Do we want infill? Who's getting opportunity? Who's not? We absolutely began to see that. And so I would just say, yes, I do want to connect with Global Detroit. We actually met a couple weeks ago at New Lab. But I would love to talk to Global Detroit because there is some really deep work that has to be done that's more than about the physical place, but that's about the true reconnection of these social connections that have been severed over time. So just building the Greenway didn't just put that back together.
Right. Randy, this is not exclusive to urban centers.
No. I mean, the analogies between Detroit and Port Huron are deep. I think if you ever get in the place where you're comfortable and you think you are doing things really well, you're probably not. Right? I think the times we made our biggest mistakes as a funder, Dave, when funders lead with an idea or there's the perception that we're leading with the idea, that's a problem, right? And it has come back to bite us. Our Latino Hispanic population, our Black community, our Native American community, most of the times they are invisible. So I think we always have to pause ourselves and make sure we always remember we're probably not doing enough to root it in the community. You may think you are, but I think we need to remind ourselves we're probably not, and let's circle back, let's go back a few steps, because it has come back, and we have heard criticism, and justifiably so, right? So if you ever get too comfortable, for those of you in small town Michigan, look in the mirror and say, all right, what have I forgotten? Who have I forgotten doing the work?
So let's shift to the first part of the question, which was, what are you doing to assure that you're gathering everyone who should be there? And JJ, let's start with you and tell the story of the 190 in Buffalo and the two sides of the freeway and how the park, how the Ralph Wilson Conservancy has worked on that.
Absolutely. It's been an interesting journey over 7 or 8 years now with that conservancy that didn't exist. But having that authentic voice, what we learned very quickly through what's called the Imagine LaSalle campaign is some of those voices were not being heard. And we started with this idea of, similar to Detroit, 20 or 30 acres. Now that vision is 100 acres, and it includes a bridge to cross the I-190 that's now in place so the Lower West Side community can actually access the park. But you had very different communities on either side. And you had one that really wanted access and wanted a bridge, and literally the other one wanted a wall for other reasons to prevent folks from accessing the park. And you heard that from the community. And I think for us is being somewhat of an honest broker as a funder to say, it's not just the loudest voice. We have to stop, we have to listen and work with the city, work with the nonprofit partners in the Conservancy to make sure we're getting as many voices as we can. There's the Waterfront Elementary is on the other side of the 190, and I can picture it in my mind, all of those meetings that we used to attend, translated into 10 or 12 different languages to make sure you're hearing that. There's pieces of that park that will be developed with the amenities that the folks in those communities, the immigrant community wants in that park. Because the idea of, I think the Riverfront Conservancy here does it well too, welcoming to all. That's easy to say, it's very hard to do. And back to my kind of original point, the leaders that are in these spaces, I mean, that's the charge that they have, is make sure they're listening and gathering that information and reacting and then going back and doing it over and over and over. It's never done.
Right. I know, Jermaine, this doesn't happen in strategic neighborhood fund neighborhoods in Detroit. Everybody feels welcome all the time.
And I'm so glad that Dr. Jackson asked the question, because, it gives me an opportunity to kind of highlight something that I've been seeing more of, which is, this also exists on a state level between urban and rural. And being here on the island, having these conversations with folks, everybody's passionate about where they're from. If folks know me, some of my friends, if you're watching, one of my favorite songs is called Where I'm From. It's a Jay-Z song, you'll love it. But what essentially it is that in any community that you go into, folks are going to know, where are you from? Mm-hmm. How do you relate to our story? Are you listening to what's being said? And I think that usually these initiatives, and I'll say with ours, when we went out into community, we're looking at the community as a whole, as opposed to those folks who make up the community who may have a different culture, may speak a different language. And so you have to go back and reevaluate to make sure that not only are you introducing yourself to those cultural organizations, to those folks who are in community who represent people, because if you're not from the neighborhood, then you need a pass of some sort, right? That's just the reality. It doesn't matter where you're from. Is that you need somebody who's going to help you navigate the space and show you around. And you can't do that in an exploitive way. You need to do that in a way that's genuinely building relationships and thinking about not only the success of your project, but the long-term success of the people that you're serving. And to me, that is one of the most important pieces of the work, and something that I try to keep in the back of my mind every day, because at the end of the day, this is legacy that we're talking about. Some of these things that we're going to see in our lifetime, and some that we're not. And I want to be just as passionate about those things that I'm not going to see, that are not going to impact me directly, because I know it impacts the lives of those people that we're serving. And so, Dr. Jackson, thank you for the question. And I think that's something that we all need to lean into a whole lot more.
Right. So let me try to bridge the gap now between that inclusion, the building of neighborhood, the engagement of citizens, and this issue of advocacy around making sure public dollars continue to flow, whether that's maintenance or capital build. Are we doing enough? Are we, I mean, it's one thing to storytell and get to the media and take our data and push it out, but if it's pushed through your institution, is that enough? How do you empower the neighborhood to hit on the elected officials?
You know, so I think it's, I think Liana made a comment earlier about like the community represented and basically holding the neighborhood down in this situation. And I think being able to have genuine relationships gives you that kind of opportunity to navigate when stresses are taking place. But I do think that there's an opportunity that exists for foundations and nonprofits to look at this opportunity during this time where the federal government is removing funds and, you know, it's up and down almost every day, to think about how are we building the capacity on the grassroots level, right? How are we building the capacity with CDOs? How are we building the capacity with those frontline service organizations who we know in the worst of times are always going to be there to step up because they care. Their mission is different than ours, right? But if we listen to them and we're able to kind of put funds and put supports, whether it's technical assistance, whether it's training programs to help bring out those servant leaders, those community leaders that exist in every single neighborhood that we're all working in, that makes our job easier down the line, because now it doesn't just sit on Invest Detroit. It doesn't just sit on the Joe Louis Greenway Partnership or any of the foundations. It sits on everybody. And we have folks who are actively every day working to push the line in communities. And so that would be my suggestion, is that capacity piece, and that could mean funding. And I know folks kind of lean that way.
It does.
And it does. But there's also this component of the leadership capacity building and the supports that are needed to make sure that an organization is successful. How are we helping them with their accounting? How are we helping them with their operations? How are they helping small businesses who are in these areas who might not have, legal representation or accounting, and they're struggling, but they make some of the best cheesecake in the world, or they sell the best, colognes and perfume, like whatever your small business is, you have to connect all of those things, because that's what makes community.
If I could jump in, a couple things that come to mind is, I think as opposed to looking at the role of, maybe philanthropy, and I'll just kind of look at it from that lens in terms of empowering and saying our role is to remove obstacles, right? And just maybe look at it and say residents have power, right? And if we remove obstacles, then they can leverage and utilize their powers. And so if our role is, okay, what is the obstacle, and let's use our resources to remove that, then residents are already empowered. They already have the ability to do that. It is the obstacle that they can't move that's in the way. And so I would just kind of shift that narrative to say that, residents can do it. They just have obstacles that they're unable to remove. And if we have resources, resources are financial, that helps to remove obstacles. And then the final thing is investing in talent. I heard a TED Talk a while ago that talks about the difference in how corporate invests in their leadership talent and how philanthropy invests in nonprofit talent. And if we want to continue to have great leaders and recruit great leaders to run great nonprofits, we need to be able to have leadership development at executive director level. And that needs to be something that is not looked at as a nice to have for nonprofits, that is a need to have.
Absolutely.
Right. Randy, you and JJ are a little handcuffed on the advocacy question. But what are you seeing that you'd hold up in terms of how to start having conversations with either in the grantees or with people in the community?
Yeah, and you can't get away from the fact, though, that, Dave, every day as a community foundation, we have to worry about hungry kids, literacy and child abuse and everything else literally today that my team has to worry about. I think what we have to do, though, is in our region, we do have a group called Blue Meets Green that I think is going to have to get more into politics and advocacy and educating with data and stats, because then that's the business community as well as the neighborhoods. It's the schools as well as the philanthropic sector. And I think we're going to have to build on the muscle memory of that organization. But again, you better be addressing as much as you can, or making sure they understand you care about feeding their kids, after school care, right, summer recreation. You can't separate it. So you have to be all in.
JJ?
I just think it goes back to leadership, and when you have those folks in those roles, the community wants to be heard, right, wrong, or indifferent. There are good things, there are bad things, and given the avenue to have that conversation and try to solve problems, you can't solve everything.
Yeah.
But if you're listening and you have that authentic relationship that you mentioned, it makes these spaces so great.
Great. We're unfortunately out of time. We could go the rest of the day, but please help me thank this great panel.
I love listening to you.
Yes, I love listening.
Really.